I've just been asked to share my perspectives on the draft minerals policy as it stands today, whether it is helping in promoting and securing community rights and empowerment. I think this speaks directly to the theme of this meeting, where we are saying that community rights are key to empowerment. Is that so? So basically, I'll be looking at this draft minerals policy, which has now been developed by the government of Zimbabwe through the Ministry of Mines and Minerals Development. We are not sure what is going to become of it with this new government, but our hope is that it's going to continue. It was started by the outgoing minister, but hopefully it's going to continue. The background to this is that in 2007, the government of Zimbabwe tried to initiate mining reforms in the based on the Mines and Minerals Act. So there was a bill that was sent to cabinet, but when those proposals were sent to cabinet, they felt that the amendments were too many, that it made a whole lot of sense to start afresh, come up with the new Mines and Minerals Act. So the draft minerals policy is meant to precede the development of this new Comprehensive Mines and Minerals Act, which makes a lot of sense because a policy is a statement of intent of what the government wants to do in a given sector, and in this case, that's the mining sector. So it sort of lays out the vision, the guideline, the principles that will inform the development of the new Mines and Minerals Act. So I'll share this analysis using this framework, which have just been outlined there. I'll first of all look at why does it matter that we give a lot of concern to community? What's so special about communities? After all, these resources belong to the whole nation, don't they? Some of these communities find themselves sitting on these large ores or reserves of diamonds by geographical accident. So why is it that we tend to give special concern to them, and even shaping the theme of this alternative mining industry, where we are saying communities are so special? So I'll try to show why we need to give special attention to communities. I argue that the problem that we are facing within the mining sector that we've been discussing since yesterday and today are basically as a result of poor mineral governance. So I'll try to show what is governance, then probably look at some of the principles that constitute good governance. Then after that, I'll go on to zero on the problems that are there within Zimbabwe's mining sector. I'll focus on one of the key acts, which is the Mines and Minerals Act of 1961. I know there are a number of acts and policies that led to mining legislation in Zimbabwe, but my focus, especially for this presentation, will be on the Mines and Minerals Act. So what are some of the problems that are there that are resulting in community rights being violated? Then after that, I'll go briefly to the draft minerals policy to see whether the provisions that are there are advancing or promoting community rights. Then also go on to some recommendations that can be used to strengthen this draft minerals policy as the government of Zimbabwe try to finalize it. So I'll start by trying to derive some sort of inspiration from the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, which also speaks of these issues on the need for people to use natural resources that are found within their areas to improve their livelihoods. And if you look at that, it's broad. It talks about people. And in my own interpretation, communities are part of those people that are being referred to by the African Charter on Human and People's Rights. So there's a basis for us as we argue for these rights. It's not something that we are just plugging from nowhere. This document, the African Charter, signed by African governments, does speak to these rights that communities have of natural resources that are found within their locality, that they should be able to use them to improve their own livelihoods, to improve their own economic, to improve their own dwellings, whatever they use those resources for. So for me, this is very important. These two sections from the African Charter on People's Rights, Section 21, Subsection 1, and also Article 22. They speak to the need for the communities included to begin to use these resources to promote their own livelihoods. Next. So why communities? I think it's a given fact that most of the minings that we see in Africa happens in rural areas. I think it's only Johannesburg that I've seen mining happening in urban areas. But most of these do happen in rural areas, and communities are directly affected by those mining activities. That's why we are trying to give special attention to them. Proponents of mining argue that it is going to bring economic development, especially to those communities where this mining will be happening. But from the testimonies that we have had since the day, from the research that have been done, it's actually showing that communities do not necessarily get these benefits. It's basically the cost that they get, while other people get the benefits. That's why last year we had a theme which said counting the costs and questioning the best, which was basically speaking to this theme that communities are not seeing the benefits. All they see are the costs that are associated with mining, the environmental degradation that we talk about, the air pollution, the contaminated water that we saw yesterday. That's what communities are seeing. But where are the benefits? Who is benefit? And where are those benefits going to? We have seen the violation of community rights, environmental, economic, social, and cultural rights. And for those that argue that mineral resources belong to the whole nation, which we are not disputing, and our argument has never been to say that communities should have everything, but we are saying that they should also have a fair share of those benefits. That's our bone of contention. We know that these mineral resources are supposed to help the whole nation to develop, but at least those that are directly affected must also get a fair share of the extraction of those resources. So we have seen the violations directly impacting those communities where the mining is happening. So for those who argue that it affects the whole nation, then I've got serious problems with that. Because the evictions that we see happening, the pollution that we see for the communities in Sawe, the communities in the Great Dike, it's not everyone that is being affected. Those that are in urban cities, those that are in Harare, they're not facing the same challenges. When that contamination of water happens, they're not affected. When those forced evictions and relocations without fair and adequate compensation being paid, is it everyone that is being affected? It's not everyone. That's why we need to give special attention to these communities. We have also seen the loss of agricultural land and grazing land. Value is given to mineral resources, but who says that land does not have a value? Land is probably the key resource that rural communities have, because this is where they live, this is where they do their cultivation, this is where they graze their cattle. So for them, it's also an economic resource, a great economic resource for that matter. But when a mineral resource is discovered, preference is given to that mineral resource as if the land itself does not have any value. Yet it has value, it is sustaining livelihoods. This has all resulted in people questioning what is really development. Who really defines what development is when these communities are impoverished, all in the interest of national development? Who defines this development? Probably we need to revisit the definition of development, whether it is a certain segment of society that defines what constitutes development, while other sectors of the economy or sectors of the communities, for that matter, are being left behind. I've given some pictures here which show some of the pollution that is happening. You saw some of that water that was being demonstrated here yesterday. It's not surprising if you see what is happening. The next picture, please. Again, we heard of cattle falling into some of these places and needing about 10 oxes to draw them out. And that's not surprising. Look at what is happening as a result of diamond mining operations. Next, please. These are cattle that are drinking some of the contaminated water, and we know the significance of cattle for rural livelihoods. They get a lot of money from this, a lot of livelihoods. But because of mining activities, some of those cattle end up being affected. And there's an organization, we're actually in the process of trying to commission a scientific study that will basically analyze the linkage between pollution and some of the diseases that are now being found in these cattle, and that has resulted in some of them dying. This is a calf drinking some polluted water in Mazoe River. For those who think that we only have an obsession with diamonds, this is Mazoe where there's diamond mining. Probably if you go back to to visit that area, that calf is probably long gone by now. We saw the issues of artisanal small-scale miners yesterday, and this is some of the issues that are there. The use of mercury to cleanse gold and the negative health impacts that result. Again, small-scale miners, microcosas, doing what they know best. We had some passionate testimonies yesterday on how these guys are contributing to economic development, but the environmental damage is also very obvious. Next. So as I have already pointed out, I said some of these problems that we are having within Zimbabwe's mining sector are basically as a result of poor governance. And the World Bank tries to define what good governance is all about, or what governance is all about. And as you can see there, it talks of a number of issues that makes good governance. It looks at the executive itself, the legislature, and the judiciary, and the participation of people within the institutional frameworks that determines what happens. For me, what is most key from that definition is that governance itself is not all about one key stakeholder, which is usually the government. I think this is the problem that we've had within the mining sector, where the government thinks that it is the only key stakeholder when it comes to mining. But from that definition, it's evident that there are a number of stakeholders, key stakeholders for that matter, that are also important in the mining sector, which include communities, community-based organizations, society organizations, including the private sector. But what I've seen most is that the state and the private sector think that they are the only actors and they are the only people who should be able to make decisions when it comes to mining. But I think if you look into the broad definition of governance, it has to take into account other players. And for us, that's where the bone of contention is, to say we acknowledge the role of the private sector, we acknowledge the role of the government, but it is also to do that in consultation with other stakeholders, in consultation with other participants. We include the communities who are directly affected by the mining activities, and also society organizations because of the expertise that they have when it comes to mining issues. So these are some of the principles of good governance. Participation. We heard yesterday that there should be no decision that are made without our participation. And what we mean by participation is not basically to have other people speaking on our behalf. That's why we have got this meeting where we are trying to empower communities to begin to speak on their own instead of having other people, the so-called representatives, speaking on their behalf. Transparency and accountability, these are key. If we are to lobby, we need information. But how do we have information without that information being supplied to us? I'm sure that's why we end up having those allegations that people speculate. But the information should be available. Empowerment, I think that's a key. We have the Indigenization Economic Empowerment Act, but is it empowering communities? Rule of law is also very critical. We have heard that there are some companies that are regarded as being more special than others. So even in terms of enforcement, they don't face the same consequences. Some argue that we are indigenous companies, yet they are also doing the pollution. But if the rule of law is to be applied strictly, even those indigenous companies should also be held to the same measure. And in any case, being indigenous should actually help us to set the standards, to say this is how we want our standards to apply, so that when those foreign companies would simply say these are the high standards that we have set, so you should be able to abide by them. But what I've seen is that some of those mining companies, foreign mining companies for that matter, have even better standards than ours. So what example are we setting? So the problems within the mining sector, in my own opinion, are basically reflected in the Mines and Minerals Act, which is the principal act regulating the extraction of mineral resources in Zimbabwe. First and foremost, it fails to recognize communities as important stakeholders. As I have already indicated, governance is all about recognizing the role that other stakeholders play other than government. But if you look at the Mines and Minerals Act, it appears as if communities are non-entity. They don't matter. Decisions are made on their behalf. They are not consulted. They don't participate. Look at the Mining Affairs Board, where other stakeholders that are considered to matter are actually participating. But communities are conspicuous by their absence. They are not there. We are told that those who are there should be able to speak on their behalf. Be that as it may, but I think we also agree that we are moving from this very concept of representative democracy to participative democracy. So we want the communities to have a seat in this Mining Affairs Board so that they'll be able to speak on their own, articulate the issues as they affect them. We had the testimonies from the communities yesterday. So why can't they sit in that same board and articulate the issues as they did yesterday? Why should we trust other people, other stakeholders, to speak on their behalf? Especially when those other stakeholders, they've got a seat in that board. Why can't the communities have the same opportunity? Lack of access to information. This is very critical. We have heard that there is need for these EIAs to be done, the environmental impact assessments. But is the information shared? Are the communities consulted? Do they know the impacts of the mining activity that will be taking place in their areas? They are not. They are not told. The information is not shared. And even when that information is availed, we hear that it will be presented in a very technical way that will not make any sense to the communities. But people will still argue that we consulted the communities. People will still argue that the communities are participated in the decision-making processes, which is not fair, which is not true. Next. So let me now go on to look at this draft minerals policy which is being developed by the government of Zimbabwe to see to what extent is it trying to take into account community rights. I think let me start by looking at the vision statement itself. It talks about mutually beneficial partnerships between the state, the private sector, CSOs and local communities and other stakeholders. And I've highlighted there local communities, which in my own opinion is to some extent trying to take into account those criticisms that we have seen being leveled against the current Mines and Minerals Act, that is ignoring the role of communities and other stakeholders like civil society organizations. So to some extent it tries to take that into account in its vision statement. It also talks about a vibrant, environmental friendly and social artisanal and small-scale miners, which also to some extent include some of the community members, because some of these artisanal miners, makorokosas, are also coming from these communities. And again, this is a progressive development, taking into account that the current Mines and Minerals Act does not recognize the role of artisanal and small-scale miners. These are regarded as illegal. But this draft policy, to some extent, realize the vital economic role that they play in terms of economic development and trying to cater for their needs.
Naudza munobata munenge murikubata muchipinza zvepolitics mukati muchiita semunoshora hurumende muchiita semunodi isitoza kuti munhu wose unokanganisa hapana munhu ugona zvose. Handizivi kuti muvezera makachena zvakadii pamuitiro yenyu zvokuti patichaita mumwe musangano unotevera tichaona zvinhu zvose zvamamuchita highlight apa sezvikanganiswa kuti zvinenge zvagadzirwa here, kusvika papi, uye kuti tingazofara zvikuru kana munga toita setiri kudzidza zvimwe tichiitawo setiri criticize. Saka toda kuziva kuti tichange tapapi panguva inoteera patichaita umwe musangano.
It's just highlighting the need for civil society not to just critique but offer alternatives and emphasizing the need to there be some progress by the next meeting.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We have heard about the draft policy on the mines and minerals, but unfortunately, we are supposed to be the communities concerned, local authorities, Nimadishe. But I doubt very much whether Chief Chipulilo was ever consulted or did participate in a forum whereby they were discussing about this draft act. And I also doubt whether Chief Mapanzule was did ever participate or consulted concerning the draft act. Why I'm asking this question is because, for example, the traditional chiefs are supposed to be the custodians of the minerals or any chiwanimba in that area, but unfortunately they have not been consulted. Even the local authorities concerned, we are there to facilitate development. We are also there in our areas of jurisdiction. That is where the mines are found, but we were never consulted. When are we going to be consulted? That is my major question. Thank you very much.
Then we've got a question, then we'll have some answers. Let me just give the ladies an opportunity.
Vachirongwa chichitanga nezuro ndoona chine zvinhu zvinobata nekudzimbira chiri kunyatsotaura nekududzira zviri kuitika chaizvo kumaraini kwatiri kugara kumaruzevha uko. Saka tiri kuona tiri kudzidza ende sezvakataurwa naTawanda tichanodzidzisawo vamwe vari kumaruzevha vari kutambura nezvinhu zviri kutaurwa munomu. Taona kuti zvinhu zviri kutaurwa munomu zvabata masmall scale nemalage, zvichitaura izvo kuti mvura dziri kusviba, pollution iri kuitiwa nemagovernment companies, vanhu vari kumaraini tiri kuhla kutaura navo macompanies nekuti echingoti ndezvehurumende. Mapolitician ari kuuyawo ikoko vachichera, vachisimbirira, vachiita makambani. MaChinese, maRussians vari kufevhewa nehurumende, havasiri kusungwa, vari kungoita zvavanoda. Saka ini ndinoona sekuti zvatakadzidziswa naTawanda tikanozvishandisa kuti no one is above the law, and the Rome was not built in a day, but it was built. Kureva kuti nyangwe iyesu tadzidza tikadzokera kumamisha tikanodzidzisa vanhu vedu vari kumamisha sezvakataurwa naTawanda, tumwe nomwe ngaenda anodzidzisa vanhu 10 kana more, ndichiona kuti zvichavandudza, zvichatidetsera. Asi zvimwezve zvandinoona ini ndezvekuti ivo maminista takawa kuti vakaiswa zuro vaya panext indava, ini ndachikumbiro hwangu ndakamirirawo madzimai kuti dei tambovadana, nekuti ndopataura kuti mapolitician ari kutsimbirira ndozve vane zvigaro zvikuru. Zvigaro tistovapa hatifaniri kuvahla. Panext indava vadanei, tizotaura navo munomu kuti patine tichikugadzaiwo paya paya tichiti kamaenda kuparamende ndisazotikangama zvigozhero zvatiri kusangana nazvo kumaruzevha kuri kuchegwa zviri kudai ndokutoti nyaya ipere, nekuti chero isu tikazviwa hatina simba rekuti zvigadzirisi. Ivo vanhu vakagadzirwa zuro, ivo vaya ndo vane simba guru rekuti tikazotaura navo muno muindava vanokwanisa kudii kugadzirisa zvinhu. Ndo maonero andiri kuita.
Nganditange naChief pane concern yekuti probably sema-civil society organizations tingoripo pakukriticize zvinoitwa nehurumende. Hongu tinokriticize, but tinoacknowledgewo zvakanaka zvavanenge vachiita. Tahighlighta pandanga ndichipresenta kuti this draft minerals policy yanga iri response kumabasa atanga tichiita sema-civil society organizations, kuona kuti tine problem paMines and Minerals Act iripo inova yakapaswa muna 1961, mazuva erotation. Izvezvi takabva kuita imwe constitution tichiti longest house constitution yakaitwa muna 1979 haichaenderani nezvatinotarisira isu vana veZimbabwe in terms of development. Saka kana tichiti longest house constitution yamuna 1979 yanga isikachakwanisi kugadzirisa zvimwe zvibenganidzwa zvatiri kusangana nazvo, what more of an act of 1961? For me, that should have been the first act yanga yachingwa nekuti iri kutikanganisira in terms of ma-issues atiri kudhila nawo kumining. Ma-community rights itiri kuti imi mune ma-rights, but kuti haasi kurecognizwa mumitemo irimo nhasi. Saka hakusi kushora, but kutaura ma-weaknesses aripo, and tingati tichidaro tinoda kuti zvinhu zvigadziriswa, hatisi kungokriticize chete, kungoshora chete. Tinopawo nema-recommendations, ndosati tichiti kana tapedza kupresenta zvazvo tinopa ma-recommendations kuti dai hurumende yadai kuti zvinhu zvigadziriswe. And zvimwe zvacho tiri kuona hurumende yedu iri kugamuchira ichigadzirisa. Pamwe pacho havazoi zvavakotudza kuti zvimakataura zviya ndizvozvo, but tinongoona vakuita nemitemo yavanenge vachigadzira. Like iyo yedraft minerals policy ndataura kuti mukatarisa nemines minerals iripo izvezvi munoona kuti kune ma-provisions anokwanisa kunge achibatsira kuita pundutso kuma-rights ema-communities. And isu tichizvitarisa tinoona kuti it's because of kukriticize kwatanga tichiita kuya tichipa futi ma-solutions kuti dai magadzirisa maita izvezvi. Saka kukriticize hongu kuripo, asi tinenge tichiofawo nema-solutions as society organizations. It's not just criticizing for the sake of criticizing, but it's constructive criticism. Ndosaka tine ino itinoti dialogue kuti tinenge tichitaura kuti ndo maonero atinoitawo, mamwe achiti ndo maonero atinoitawo nendotira kugadzirisa. As for progress, I think patakatanga nezuro Shamiso akapa a fact check yezvotaka agree last year's mining indaba akati ndo zvotaka agree izvo, and we did a sort of review kuona kuti zvii zvakaitika pane ma-issues tanga takaraisa, and some of the issues were addressed, some of them were not, and some of them acharamba achienda futi ku this declaration this year. So tinoona kuti hatisi kungoti tinongoita chete, but we also try to put a check kuti zvitiri kurekomenda izvo zviri kugamuchirwa here nehurumende, and zvimwe zvacho tinoona zviri kugamuchirwa, zvimwe hazviri kugamuchirwa. Zvisiri kugamuchirwa tinoramba tichingoita advocacy work. Was Gauke, you wanted to know how far the draft minerals policy is a reflection of the consultative process that was done. This process is being led by the Ministry of Mines and Mining Development. Ndiwo wana that responsibility to go and consult my communities kuti waone kuti my issues are included there. From what I recall, there were some consultations that were done, but these consultations were done in major cities: Harare, Dhliwayo, Mutare, Kadoma, and Masvingo. And the assumption is that probably the community members would have also attended those meetings. But I think from what we are hearing, that did not happen. And that was one of our criticism as an organization. These are not truly consultative, because not many people have access to come to those urban areas, and also in terms of the notice that was given. So that was one of the major criticisms that we highlighted, and we're actually in the process of developing a write-up, a publication regarding the draft minerals policy, and these are issues that we are going to highlight. So that responsibility lies with the Ministry of Mines and Mining Development. And from what you are saying, it's obvious they didn't do a good job in terms of consultation. So what we are also trying to do as part of our civic duties is basically to highlight what is there, and in the hope that probably it's at the finalized no opportunity to approach a Ministry of Mines concerns now that will need to be addressed. So that's why we are having these meetings. It's an opportunity for you to know that's what is happening, legal and policy developments, and also an opportunity for you to make an input if you can. So that's one of the reasons why we have these meetings. Then ndoya kuna mama wanga wachitaura kuti pa next indaba tinoda kuti ma ministers anga ari pano achipindura mamwe ma issues atiri kuraise. That's a very good point. And even for this indaba, we had invited my ministers. We had invited the Minister of Mines and Mining Development. Mukatasawa program pen munaona waripo. Tangata invite foot a minister of indigenization and economic empowerment, because no flood, no ministries initially to discuss upon, but they were not able to attend. So the absence is not because we have not invited them. We did invite them, but probably because of the constitution of a new government. That's why they were not able to attend, because they didn't really know who is going to be where. And God report to the outgoing ministers. So yes, we agree to that recommendation, and as an organization we always try to do that, because we are trying to influence policy, and we can't influence policy by not, when you don't involve the relevant ministries, the relevant policymakers, be they parliamentarians, be they ministries. So that's what we do as an organization. We reach out, we try to have dialogue and say, this is how we see things, then let's hear your perspective. So we assure you that next year we are going to invite the ministers. If they are not here, be assured that it's not because they have not been invited, but probably for one reason or the other, they've turned down that invitation.
Thank you, Mutuso, for a very brilliant presentation. I think it covered a lot of the things that we've been trying to find out about the policies in Zimbabwe and how they relate to the region. Now, the worry is, yesterday there was a lot of anxiety that Zimbabwe still doesn't have a cabinet, and it was announced yesterday, and there's a new Minister of Mines. I'm surprised that it wasn't a topical issue right at the beginning today. Why I ask is that there are a lot of changes in government, and the draft policy that you're talking about is it probably had a lot of proponents that are no longer involved in government work, as it were. So my question, if I were to put it as a question, is what are the prospects of this going further than being just a draft? And what are the prospects of it, of the progressive things that you've just mentioned? And rightly you say most of those progressive things come as a result of the dialogue, the vibrant dialogue that you've had with government all along. So the question remains that what are the prospects for this seeing the light of day? And then secondly, I think by announcing or getting a new cabinet, we are pretty much back on the world arena, normalized world relations. So now the question is, and also because we've been accepted to the rest of the world, the Kimberley process and so forth. Now, to what extent would international players have any effect on how we are going to behave ourselves in the extractive industries or mineral or mining in this country?
Maybe actually my first contribution is related to the last contribution. That I think in Zimbabwe, our major challenge in terms of development, it has been retrogressive in the sense that our policies, they are sort of centered on individuals. So the comment that has just been said now is when we do discussions, it depends on who has initiated it. I think we should be moving away from that and then institutionalize policy. So that doesn't matter who is sitting in the seat. Development has to go on because it's for the nation, not for an individual. And then Adakara, if you will allow me, maybe before we close, I can go back a little bit to the KP process and find out from Shamiso and Farai in terms of the gender representation on the KP monitoring process. Because for me, I think that's an indication of the genuineness and commitment to gender equity. Because half the time when we go downstream, and that has not happened at the decision-making level, then we find women's participation in most cases is lopsided towards men. So I want to find out what is the gender representation on the KP monitoring process. Thank you.
Mashoka takagara tamanzwa kubva nesuro kusvikana nhasi chidziso dzakanaka zvikuru. Saka pane zvamamaini zvonyanya kutotirwadza nokuti isu kwedu tine mamaini akatowanda. Vana vedu munzvimbo havasi kupinzwa kana basa mumamaini imomo. Machaina achona akapinza vana vedu vanobarwa hafu. Nokuda kwezvikweretu zvakagara zvapinda muno muZimbabwe. Saka kuti zvikweretu zviperi toshawa kuti tozviita sei. Saka mivezera tapara zvikuru tine chirongwa chenyu chamauya nacho ichi. Tinoda pamwe tingawana punduso yakanaka kumadzimai. Nokuti zvinhu zvakaita sezvizvi chirongwa chakanaka. Thank you.
Calculation of the unit tax and how this is resulting in the losses to the rural district councils. I think there's been a presentation on taxation, and there is a group that is working on issues related to tax avoidance and tax evasion. So I'll defer that question to Shami, so I think who is involved in that will be able to answer better on how the rural district councils are losing out in terms of the calculation of the unit tax. Then I'll come to Manda's question. This draft minerals policy, what will become of it now that we have a new government? I think Judith has partly responded to that from our point of view, this was a government program, this was a government initiative, which should continue even beyond the change of personnel. So our hope is that the draft minerals policy as a government program, as a government document, will be able to continue irrespective of the changes that have happened, that have now resulted in a new minister coming in the name of Walter Chidakwa, who is now the new Minister of Mines and Mining Development. So we hope that it will continue, this draft minerals policy, because it is meant to address problems within the mining sector, which were not only as a result of probably the individual minister who was there identifying those as the problems. As I indicated in my presentation, it was after the ministry had tried to amend the Mines and Minerals Act, and it was thought that the amendments were too many, so it made a lot of sense to come up with a new Mines and Minerals Act. So the draft minerals policy is meant to shape that. So our hope is that it's going to continue. Then how is this cabinet likely to influence our behavior? I think that was the question. Is it related to the world? That's a difficult one, because it depends on what the government of Zimbabwe would like to link with the international world. I think the sign that we have been getting is that there was likely to be some easing of tensions between us and the rest of the world after the elections. But what we are seeing is that those tensions are likely to continue because of the disputed outcome of the elections, where others say it was not done properly, while others say it was done properly. So that is likely to shape the kind of engagement and kind of relationship that we are going to have, and that will also have implications in terms of how we manage our resources. I think issues to do with transparency and accountability, these are likely to be affected. Why? Because the sanction busting mode, in my opinion, will likely continue, because the argument will be simply that the sanctions are there, so why should we be transparent and accountable with whatever we are generating? But I think as an organization we've argued that this transparency and accountability is not meant to benefit foreigners. It's meant to benefit us as Zimbabweans, to get to understand how much we are generating as a country and how we are using those resources that are being generated. So my fear is that warring mood is likely to continue because of the disputed outcome of the elections. Then the other one was basically a comment from my Ngwachiti Vanotenda ne Programino, Tirukita, which is helping them to understand how they are impacted by mining activities and what they need to do to ensure that they advance and promote their rights. So we are grateful for that support that you are giving us as an organization. As I said, communities are at the center of whatever we do. Without communities, I don't know what we will be as an organization, because for us, that's our bread and butter issues. We are there to promote and advance community rights so that they can meaningfully benefit from the resources that are found within their localities. It's not just mineral resources. Here we are focusing on mineral resources because that's the theme for this INDA. But we also focus on other resources like wildlife, forestry, water, and fishery resources, all anchored on the need to ensure that communities derive meaningful benefits from those resources. Thank you.
I will respond to two issues: the calculation of the unit tax issue. Yes, it was raised during the Veru Midlands provincial alternative mining unit, if I remember well. Yeah, we also raised it in Mutare with the Ministry of Mines during the consultation process. And they were basically noting all the issues that were raised from the floor. So we also are waiting to see what's in the draft, how they will tackle the issue of unit tax, especially for local authorities. But as an organization, ZELA will actually be carrying out a survey on local authorities that are in mineral-rich communities to see how much has been paid, how much is being paid, who is refusing to pay. I know Mutogo has been a problem, Mr. Stel. The conflicts with mining companies. I understand they were resolved to some extent. So we need a better understanding of what's happening, how much is going to the local authorities, and is it adequate to make sure that at least you get a reasonable and fair amount, given the fact that local authorities are in control of those areas where mining is taking place. So we need to investigate that and understand it deeper, so that at least we come up with informed policy positions and proposed legal recommendations. So that's my response to that. The second issue is around gender representation in the Kimberley Process Civil Society Coalition representatives. We have the Women's Coalition as a member of that grouping, but I would not want to say we were very satisfied with their participation, because sometimes they would not attend meetings, sometimes they attend meetings. So I I think we could have done much more than what's happening there. But I would also want to point out that you find that most of the organizations that constitute that grouping, Crisis Coalition, ZELA, CRG, CNRG, and the others, these are organizations that already had projects in Marange, ongoing projects in Marange. And this committee was actually formed at a time when things were tough and tense in Marange. So a lot of organizations were afraid even to talk about diamonds. So at that time, many organizations resisted joining that coalition because you wouldn't know the next day you may end up having your offices raided or something like that. So not a lot of organizations volunteered to be part of that grouping. So it ended up with organizations from the mainstream. But I do not want to say these organizations are not engendered in terms of their staffing and their programming. They are very engendered. I know ZELA is balanced in terms of, especially 50-50, if you have noticed. I think the same applies to the other organizations. Kimberley process itself, at a much broader level, at an international level, there are many powerful women who are leading some of the discussions in the Kimberley process. For example, last year, it was chaired, the Kimberley process was chaired by the United States with a woman who was the chairperson. And then we have one of the powerful groups, the working group on monitoring, is even chaired by a woman as well from the European Union. So it shows it is engendered to some extent. But men play a much more influential role, to be honest, in some of the discussions and decisions within the KP.